Sure.
Okay, well, let's get started. If everyone could put their microphones on mute, that would be really good. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Great to be underway again on during our second week of this 4-week program. And good to have you all here tonight together with Moragh, who I will introduce you to very shortly. For those of you who weren't at the session last week, my name is Jeff Barlow. I'm president of Healesville Community Renewable Energy Incorporated, Healesville Core for short, and I was previously the executive officer of the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, which was supported by just under $500,000 funding from Sustainability Victoria through for the Victorian government, and that has now closed down, as have the other hubs within Victoria. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the country that I am on tonight, and perhaps many of you are, and acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. And I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present tonight. Also, thank you to Emerald Community House and Pakenham Living and Learning for hosting and this event for us, or these events really. We couldn't have done the program without them, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to been able to work with Mary and Miriam from those two organisations, so that we could find a community house and living and learning centre to run this program as a trial, as we are now doing. I mentioned in the first session information about Healesville Core and what we were as an organisation, what we're on about. I won't repeat that now. I also did much the same for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, and I won't repeat that either for those people who heard it last time. But a big thank you to the Victorian government and to Sustainability Victoria for making the funding available to enable us to do this program, and also the Education Department, the Emerald Community Centre and Pakenham Living and Learning were able to get some funding through the Education Department to support this program as well. So we've got two different government departments funding in this program, which is really a great form of cooperation between different departments and the local community, which is us in Healesville and the groups in Emerald and Pakenham, and all of you people who are here tonight as well. And just a reminder too that after the 4 weeks of the program, this is the second, as I mentioned, but we've got another 2 to come. Then 2 weeks after that final session, we will have the site visit up to Glenn Morris's project up on Mount Tullibawong, and also a visit to the Yarra Valley water treatment plant out at Wandon, which is run from a solar energy system, and we'll have a speaker to address our group there, as well as a speaker up at Muramura, where Glenn will talk to you about all of the technical stuff he's got available there, batteries and a whole different range of solar panels, heat pumps and other sort of solar energy systems, a microgrid, etc., etc. It's a huge amount of work that he's done up there, and I think you'll be very interested in that. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Moragh Mackay here tonight. I met Moragh through Matthew Charles Jones from Totally Renewable Yakandanda, another community energy group. And Moragh became our keynote speaker for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub Community Energy Roadshow, which we ran just a short time ago, where we ran an event for a couple of hours at different towns around the local region, and they were reasonably well attended, and those people who did attend found them very interesting. Moragh, of course, was our keynote speaker there, and I was very excited to have her in that role, or to have you in that role, Moragh. Just a little bit of background. Moragh's got over 30 years experience in facilitating co-design in the areas of environmental restoration, regenerative agriculture, climate adaptation, renewable energy, emissions reduction, community-based economic development, strategic planning, and value creation. She's a practitioner researcher in collaborative environmental governance, and was a founding director of the Energy Innovation Cooperative in 2009 and chair of that organization 2015 to 19. She has most recently held positions of senior policy advisor at the Federation of Victorian Traditional Owner Corporations, new energy projects manager and team leader of Gippsland's Smart Specialisation Team with the Latrobe Valley Authority, and she's now the managing director of Mycelia Renewables Limited, a social enterprise dedicated to facilitating co-design of circular economy initiatives. Moragh is very well versed in community renewable energy, and I welcome you tonight, Moragh, and hand the session over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I would like to just start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded lands of the Yaluk clan of the Bunurong Nations, and who are also part of the Kulin Nations. I probably should get straight into sharing my screen, so bear with me while I just fiddle around for a couple of seconds. And now you're over on my other side, so I will be looking backwards and forwards because I've got split screens today. So how I would like to run this this presentation is just all right. So I've got a fair bit of content to share with you, and so what I would really like to do is take some stops along the way and let anyone ask any sort of questions of clarification, and so that the content's not getting too rich and deep before you get a chance to sort of clarify any bits that you might want to have a bit more detail on. But we'll wait for the broader discussion towards the end, where we get to sort of really talk in a bit more depth about what your thoughts are about any of the content that I've presented, and where you might want to know more or discuss any ideas that have come up for you as a result of listening to the stuff that I'm going to share with you. So we'll cover. And apologies for anyone who did see the roadshow events. I am drawing on just a couple of early slides from that event, so I will just use them just to set a bit of context for community renewable energy, and where really where the openings are for community energy to step into and fill some gaps, and bring some added value or benefit sharing to a broader set of members of our community. And then I'll go into the specific energy models that we're seeing, community energy models that we're seeing around Australia, and present as much detail as we've got time for on some of the initiatives that I think that you might be interested in hearing about. Okay, so let's get started. Just in terms of the context then, the centralised electricity system that we have currently, and it's rapidly becoming a more distributed system already, but from about the 1950s to about 10 years ago, really, it's been heavily centralised energy system, with the generation mostly situated down in the Latrobe Valley with the coal-fired power stations, more recently gas-fired power stations, and then distributed through one extensive network of poles and wires across the whole state. So as we're transitioning to renewable energy, we're going to a much more distributed system where there is generation and use spread all over the state, so much less centralised. And this, in fact, is what our energy system used to look like before the centralisation of the system back there in the 40s and 50s. So hence the sort of back to the future idea that we'll have a more distributed generation and use. The population has increased as well, so we've got more regional centres and more generation trying to be established closer to where that use is across the state and across the country indeed. And so the left-hand side of that screen there, those green blobs are identified or designated renewable energy zones. So they've been identified by state and federal governments and the Australian Energy Market Operator as places where it's either a good location already because of the renewable energy resource, the wind or the sun or hydro or bioenergy potentially even, maybe in the future geothermal, and coinciding with places in the network that are going to be good to increase the capacity of the grid, the poles and wires in those places to take up more of that renewable energy where it's being generated, and then share that across the network. And we've got a fully, well, not fully, but we've got a reasonably well integrated system that spans South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and Queensland now. So the energy sharing, the energy generation that will occur in those green blobs will eventually be shared right across all of those states through all the interconnector lines. And that's work that's, underway and has got a long way to go to be able to create really safe and enduring connections. Remember the power line debacle in South Australia with the storms, and federal government conveniently sort of blamed the reliance on renewable energy for that scenario, which was completely and utterly wrong. However, that triggered more interest and investment in having more interconnectors between South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales in particular. And hence being able to connect up and have more resilience in the system. So if one part of the system falls over, then there are backups and other parts of the system that can come in and connect. So that's where we're headed. The opening or the opportunity, if you like, for community energy is that there is space in the system to set up smaller community-based systems on the edges of towns. There is, lots of contribution that rooftop solar and households and businesses are making. So there are a whole lot of ways that community can step into this transition and generate value for their communities and for individual households. So, and we'll talk more in more detail as we go about what those opportunities are. Okay, so this is just a very quick slide graph just to really illustrate how our energy sources of energy generation are diversifying. So if you look back at the left-hand side, that's 1965. We were heavily reliant on oil, gas and coal, with a little bit of hydro. Hydro's been there a long time. In fact, hydro was there before the oil and gas, or before the coal and gas in particular. Probably not so much the oil. Oil's been around a long time. But hydro was there, and then, we saw the emergence of nuclear, but then much more recently, right up here in the top, we've got wind, solar and other renewables, including bioenergy, geothermal and others. So, just a very quick sort of visual of how that mix is changing. And then likewise, another way of unpacking the same information is this is where the investment is positioned at the moment in terms of who's wanting to buy shares in companies doing what types of energy production. So from 2004 to 2021, it's mostly been solar with some wind, and then as we've hit 2014, energy storage, electrified transport, electrified heat, nuclear steps into the picture again with the, I don't know if anyone's heard, there's been a little bit of chatter in the last couple of weeks around these supposedly smaller, agile, more affordable nuclear power plants. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about those, but the jury is very much still out about how affordable they actually are, let alone how safe they might be also. So, but they're bobbing around and have done for some time. And then right up the top here, we're starting to see hydrogen and other sorts of, investments in the types of byproducts that come out of bioenergy and hydrogen and other ways of generating energy. So quite a shift from around 2014 onwards in terms of investment in these new energy and circular economy types of activities. Just for clarification purposes, in terms of scale of renewable energy, I won't be talking much about large scale stuff. There is one or two opportunities that connect with community interests around big wind and solar that I'll just mention briefly, but we'll mainly be talking about mid-scale stuff, which could include solar, wind, biomass, pumped hydro, neighbourhood batteries, and then also the individual site scale of households, businesses and community buildings. So that's a reference to scale, because scale is very important in terms of grid connections in particular, and therefore affordability and what you can do with the energy that the community might be generating. Another little sort of representation of the contribution that the different types of renewable energy are making. So back here in 1999, the only real contributor of any note was hydro. And then by 2021, you can see rooftop solar, utility scale solar, wind, battery and bioenergy started to pick up the pace considerably. And rooftop solar, interestingly, is outstripping utility scale solar, which is interesting, but wind has certainly leapfrogged ahead and is by far the largest generator now of renewable energy in Australia. And then I think this is the last of the graphs. In terms of so what is called the National Electricity Market, which is South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, they're about 31.4% of the energy generated. Well, that was in 2021, so that's no doubt increased by now. But about that percentage was generated from renewable sources of the total energy consumption in that region. And then if you look at the individual state profiles, Tasmania, because of its hydro mainly, but increasingly also its wind, we're sitting on 99.9% renewable. South Australia 65%, Victoria sitting bang smack on the national average, and then New South Wales and Queensland and just for comparison's sake, Southwest Western Australia is in there as well, doing very well. Interestingly, Queensland's set their target of 70% by, I think it might be 2030, but it might be sooner than that as well. So they've just all of a sudden fully embraced the renewable transition and are seeking to stride ahead with it. And Western Australia have got the fortunate situation where they've got a whole lot of sort of smaller sub-regional microgrids. So they've got a lot of capacity to play around with those energy microgrids and generation types on that can suit the needs of the people on those microgrids. So they're doing great things over in Western Australia, and lots for us to learn from. And this graph also just comparing and it's sort of exposing our vulnerability to the gas situation that we've found ourselves in this year for a number of reasons. But all the more reason that we absolutely need to get off our reliance on gas as soon as possible, because it's certainly a vulnerable fuel to be dependent on, and is also, let alone contributing to climate change, but is increasing the cost of energy because of those risks and vulnerabilities. Okay, so just summing up that first set of slides. So as our energy system transitions to this new distributed networks of renewable generation and storage, some of the things to think about and help with positioning community energy opportunities is the more generation closer to where it is being used, the less energy we actually have to create, because the loss factor in distributing energy long distances across the grid system that we've been using for the last 50, 60, 70 years is quite considerable. From one end of the state to the other, it's around 20% loss factor, so that's really significant. We need to increase the uptake of batteries, and I know batteries are still challenging in their affordability, but we absolutely need to push every opportunity there is to add battery storage into the mix because of the intermittency and the fluctuation of solar, and not only in terms of our own energy, meeting our own energy needs, but the impact on the grid as well, and how that creates instability in the system. So firming up with batteries and other types of dispatchable energies is really important. Increasing the diversity of energy generation, so looking at new technologies. There's a whole host of new bioenergy types of technologies. Geothermal is a real thing in Gippsland. There's quite a lot of research going into geothermal as a heat source, but also deeper geothermal, which is much higher temperature and has the potential to generate electricity through, your standard turbine, Rankine cycle turbine. And then, there's always scope to think about how we use energy. We can use energy differently to better match the way in which it's generated. So, timers, turning electrical devices on using timers when the renewable energy is most abundant is a great thing to be doing. And, for those of you who've heard me speak before, my absolute love of the idea that as we have more distributed energy systems, there are so many more opportunities for people to be involved and either save money or actually make money. So I like this metaphor of distributed energy being also akin to distributed wealth. And we need community advocates and local leaders to be able to ensure that those sorts of benefits do flow to our friends, family and communities.
Moragh, we have a question. Would you be interested in responding?
Yes, most definitely. Good time.
Jonathan of Warburton, he says, how about the percentage of coal compared to gas? That's in relation to the previous slide, I think, that you had up.
Yes, I don't have those figures. Sorry, Jonathan. I was inspired to use the gas figures because of, everything that's been happening with gas this year. So no, my apologies. I don't have that, but it is on when you go onto the Australian Energy Market Operator website. They've got all of those graphs and data, and you'll be able to see the percentage of coal. There's a really awesome live graph. I'm not sure if you've seen it before, but you can plug into the EMO site and at any point in the day, it will tell you how much energy is being generated by the different sources. So during the middle of the day, it's often, much more solar and wind, sometimes other, bioenergy types of sources. And then at night time, obviously the coal and the gas percentage increases. So that changes on a 24-hour cycle, essentially. Yeah. Sorry to not have that here on hand, but yeah, you'll find it on the AEMO site. Any other questions at this point in time before we move on? Nope. Okay. Very good. Okay, so getting into the nitty-gritty of community energy and just sort of looking back at where the origins of community energy were, there is no doubt many origin stories for community energy across the globe, because a great idea doesn't ever just happen in one place. There is, community energy is a response to the inequities in the energy system. It's in response to communities being abandoned by energy companies and or governments. It's in response to the energy supply being uncertain and insecure, and you know, there are many stories in Europe about that. You know, farmers in Norway started one of the first energy community-owned co-ops because the energy company said, we can't afford to power your part of the network anymore, so it's yours, here you go. And they established their own set of wind turbines and have not only been powering their own farms, they've been powering the neighbouring houses and community, you know, for a very long time, since at least 20 years. So, and there's co-ops around Germany, the Netherlands, across North America. But this particular story of Samso Island is a bit of a sort of a popular one, and it's a winner for all sorts of reasons, partially because this is a lovely story around a community and the national government working hand in hand to actually make it work for this island to be 100% renewable and zero net emissions, which is, they've gone beyond that now. So it was a policy opportunity and a trial opportunity for the government to see what might work to support communities to do this sort of energy transition. And then the community of Samso Island in Denmark took up that opportunity and challenge and have been leading on this for some time now. So it's a really well documented. You can get lots of information on this on the net as well. And but essentially the sort of the key take homes are that it's been incredibly popular, embraced by all the citizens. They are now, each citizen has a negative emissions profile, so they've gone beyond just net zero. They've actually got credit as individuals in terms of how much energy is produced. They're exporting energy. They're powering the ferry between the island and the mainland using renewable energy sources. And they've got energy to spare. So it's a really beautiful story, and lots of lessons learnt. It's Taryn Lane from Hepburn Wind did a study tour and has written a short piece on this, and that's also a really good source of information around this particular site and other community energy examples that she visited across Europe and North America. So but yeah, like I said, there are so many reasons why communities are inspired to take action, and you know, it requires some local leaders, but it requires good information, research, economic analysis. All the different parts of the puzzle need to come together and work for the benefit of the vision or the aspiration that the community has. So we'll also talk a little bit more about how that happens. So zooming into Australia, we have over 100 groups doing community energy now. Some of those groups call themselves community energy groups, but other groups have been community groups of all sorts of different descriptions and are doing community energy as well. So like the Hayfield Community Centre and the Venus Bay Community Centre in Gippsland are both leaders in community energy projects alongside all of the other community type activities they do. So a specialist community energy group might emerge, or an existing group might like to take up the challenge of doing community energy. This is also an interactive map on the web, on the Community Power Agency website and or the Coalition for Community Energy website. You can go onto all those pins and get some information about what those groups are and what they're up to. So that's pretty fabulous. So an interactive map. And now we just go a little bit further into what I just touched on then in terms of the models of what types of entities the groups are that do renewable energy stuff. So there is the full gamut. Once again, the groups might be incorporated associations, so either existing incorporated associations like a neighbourhood house, or a brand new entity incorporating under the incorporated associations process. There are trading and non-trading cooperatives. So that the difference for anyone who's not familiar with that is that trading cooperatives distribute dividends through any profits that they've earned. Non-trading cooperatives don't do that. So they are a member-based organisation, just like a trading cooperative, but they're not distributive. So a non-trading cooperative distribute dividends, usually sets up a separate company and has a subsidiary private company as a mechanism for doing that. They're called special purpose vehicles. So Taylor Renewable Yakandanda is an incorporated association, as is Venus Bay Community Centre. Then there are formal alliances and informal alliances. So the Taylor Renewable Phillip Island group down here in the middle, they are like an informal alliance, if you like. So they haven't incorporated as an entity in their own right. They just work with all of the partner organisations to auspice grants and facilitate different types of projects and things that they do as a collaborative alliance. Then there is the Community Power Hub, the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, which is a more formalised alliance amongst the member community energy groups. Hepburn Wind is a distributive trading cooperative, and Energy Innovation Co-op is a non-trading cooperative, if you want to have a look at the sorts of things that they do and see how they're different. And then Mycelia Renewables, the company I work for, we're a publicly listed company, social enterprise, and we're a registered charity. So we've got the agility of being a company structure, but we're for charitable purposes. So we're intents and purposes, we're profit for purpose. But that profit goes into our charitable purposes. It doesn't get distributed to any board members or members of the company. Are there any questions or clarification at this point about any of that stuff? No, all good. Okay, we'll keep going. So into the types of things that community energy groups do. So energy efficiency, first of all. So many of you probably somewhat, if not very familiar with the sort of the suite of things that you can do in the energy efficiency area. So just by way of example, sort of three main categories. There's energy efficiency training and advice, home and business energy audits and reports, and then there's this sort of suite of activities. Infiltration tests and draft proofing are just two of them, but they're very specific services that some community groups are actually offering to members and or the public. So just going back in a little bit more detail. So Healesville Core, the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, and another of their member groups, Nillumbik. I think also, Jeff, I might just check with you, but the Eastern group of member of Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, I think they're also involved in the home energy efficiency and advice. So training of volunteers to then be able to go out and do audits on homes and give people some advice about how they might improve the efficiency of their homes and or other uses of electricity.
Yes, essentially there are two groups at the moment continuing that now that the hub has closed down, Healesville Core and Clean Energy Nillumbik.
And Bunyip. And Bragg.
Bunyip's still going, excellent.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah.
And Eastern Climate Action Melbourne were interested in running them. I'm not quite sure where they're at with that now.
Okay, yeah.
They were using volunteers that were trained by the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub at Box Hill Institute during the time that we were operating.
Yep.
Yes, those are still running, the volunteer ones.
Excellent. Thanks, Lyndall. Yeah, so you know, it's a great way in which volunteers can contribute, and you know, particularly retired people, if they're passionate about this area of need, then yeah, that's an awesome thing to contribute. And Ball Ball Sustainability Group, they're in Ball Ball Shire. They've been doing a lot, and in fact, the infiltration test and the draft proofing examples here come from the Ball Ball Sustainability Group and the stuff that they're doing. And they've been using this scorecard assessment tool as well, which was developed in Gippsland, and gives people a bit of a ranking around their current energy use and efficiency, and some guidance around how they can improve that. So this is sort of, I guess, you need a level of expertise or commitment to develop the expertise, but really, really practical ways in which people in community can support others. And, you know, the general rule of thumb is that approximately 20% of your energy costs can be reduced just by increasing your home efficiency, whether that's through draft proofing, insulation improvements, turning off standby. Like, there are so many reasonably straightforward things that can be done. Not for everyone, obviously. If you're in a rental accommodation, it's a bit more challenging, but there's always something that we can do around efficiency, and very well worth doing, because the more efficient we are, the less energy then we have to produce through new generation systems. We've been, with the luxury of the energy supply that we've had over the last 70 years, we have in fact been very wasteful with energy. Okay, the bulk buy models. This is also a really, really popular thing that a lot of community energy groups do. And there are lots and lots of different ways of doing them as well. But the essential ingredients are in that little arrow diagram on the right-hand side. So there are bulk buys around solar PV, solar hot water, batteries, heat pumps, reverse cycle air conditioning, and electric vehicles. So quite a range of things now in being included. Once upon a time, it was just solar panels. So it's great to see how the bulk buy suite of work has been diversified. Normally, the community energy group would partner with a bulk buy provider. So that might be an installation company, it might be a supply company, it might be another community energy group. So Yarra Range, what are they called? Yarra Energy Foundation. Sorry, they provide a lot of support services to smaller groups to enable them to run bulk buy systems. So not every single small group has to set up their own. Yarra Valley Power Hub, Community Power Hub, also provides bulk buy services to support their member groups. Hepburn Solar has been around for a long time. Sunny Shire is a great one. That's Sutherland Shire in New South Wales, and that Jonathan Prendergast, who's one of the technical advisors to the Yarra Valley Power Hub group members, he was involved in setting this one up, and that's essentially just a small group of passionate people give their time and advice to people who want to consider different renewable energy options, and then they have one installation partner who then goes and basically installs the systems once the people wanting the system installed have landed on the deal that they want. So it's a nice, very straightforward model, that one. It doesn't rely on getting a critical mass of, say, 50 people to achieve the economy of scale that you're looking for, because the installer has already committed to providing a set price. So that's one that can just continually tick along. And so that, you know, having the Sunny Shire one is dependent on those community members having enough technical knowledge to be able to give a level of advice to people as they're inquiring into what types of solar or batteries might be best for their use. And then, of course, it's great if you are working with local installers, because it's good to have a steady flow of work for our local installation companies, because you know, they're doing a lot of good on our behalf, and it's great to support the economics of our communities. Okay, any questions at this stage about any of that? Nope. All good. All right. So hopefully you can see enough of this diagram. I'm very happy to share all of these slides as well. So yeah, be rest assured that this information will be made available after the presentation. So this is referring to the suite of sort of what's called behind the meter opportunities where community energy groups are being involved. So that is, in a nutshell, setting up solar and battery more and more on the building of a business or a community that has a reasonably good, solid, high energy use on that site, and then they are able, so the energy is generated on the building and the energy could go straight into the building. It doesn't have to go through the grid. So there's savings there because you're not paying for the cost of transporting energy along the grid system. So it's just about the cost of the system being installed on the building or ground mounted as it is in that top picture, supplying energy directly to be consumed on site. And then the arrangements are usually that whether it's, and Bunyip are looking at doing a project that's got an element of this. The Energy Innovation Co-op, when I was with them, we constructed 90 kilowatts of solar and around 45 kilowatt hours of battery storage at the state coal mine down in Wonthaggi, which is a Parks Victoria site. And so the energy system provides energy on site. The user of that energy, in that case, Parks Victoria, pay the energy co-op for the energy that they use. Excess is exported, and you can have a couple of different ways of handling that. It can either be credited to the user on their bill, so once again is a further saving, and/or sometimes the feed-in tariff comes back to the owner of the system. So that's in the finer detail of the arrangements that you might set up, but essentially the price that the on-site user will be paying can be 2/3 to a half of what they're currently paying by buying energy directly off the grid. So community groups usually access grants and/or raise capital through a donations drive. Sometimes they do it through a crowdsource investment drive. Geelong Sustainability did a big one of these and put on a massive system of solar panels and batteries on an aged care facility down there in Geelong. So the Geelong Sustainability Group own that system. The aged care facility buys the energy from them. And then, everyone's in front. The aged care facility energy prices being cut, and the community group, the Geelong Sustainability, is making some money, and they're accruing that money to then go and do more of these installations. Healesville Core has done some of these as well. They've put renewable energy on the kindergarten and a couple of other sites. So this is happening a lot around the country, and it seems like it's an excellent way to generate multiple benefits for everyone involved. You do need to raise the capital to begin with, but a good way of doing that, if you're not fortunate enough to land a large grant, is to try a smaller project first and start to build your capital, and then use that capital to attract further grants or donations. So making it a small start somewhere is a great way to get into this market. And Repower Shoalhaven, the photo down there on the left-hand side of the screen, and Pingala with Young Henry's Brewery in Sydney are sort of leading lights of how incredibly successful this model is, because they started just with one site each, and now they have multiple sites in their areas that they have funded the installation of systems that are now benefiting the businesses and/or community buildings, and also bringing profits back to the renewable energy group that are able to then reinvest. So it's a brilliant model, and I think one that we will just see grow and grow. Any questions about that one? All good. Okay.
If I could just say, if anybody's got any questions, you can just unmute your microphone to ask, or you can put it in the type it into the chat at the bottom of the screen, and we'll read that out for you later.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so getting slightly scaling it up a little bit and getting a little bit more complicated in some of the things that community energy groups are doing. So this one's about revolving funds and benefit sharing. So I'm not sure who's heard of the Carina Fund. Carina Fund were one of the first very large revolving funds in the country. They started in South Australia, but they fund projects all over the place. They're not restricted to South Australia, and that they just bring in donations into their fund and then provide no interest loans to community energy groups. And that's another way that if you don't have your own capital, that's another way of getting capital that you have to repay, but you're not paying interest on it. So and Carina Fund and the Energy Innovation Co-op have got the Southern Core Fund. They're local to Gippsland. They're able to support projects across Victoria, and the idea is that if they're funding either renewable energy on a community building and the community is saving the money, or it's supporting a community energy group to do a behind the meter investment type project to earn money. The idea is to repay the loan at a rate that means that the community group is in front at the same time as repaying. So they're matched so that there's a little bit of extra in the pocket and enough to go back to repaying the loan at a reasonable over a reasonable time frame. And Healesville Core have got a small fund, and that's what they've used. And Jeff can probably talk to this a little bit more later, but that, the kindergarten example and the other two sites that they've funded were through that process. The other type of fund that you see in the renewable energy area is what's called a community benefit sharing fund. So in all large-scale renewable energy developments are encouraged by government to have community benefit sharing funds. Not all of them do. In fact, not even the majority of them do. In Victoria, through the Victorian Renewable Energy Target reverse auction process, which is very tightly managed by the state government, it's an absolute requirement to have a community benefit sharing fund. But in all of the other renewable energy developments that are popping up all over the place, it's not a requirement. Having said that, the pressure coming from community now, knowing that there are really good examples of where renewable energy developments have worked with their communities, it's almost the expectation now. So it's much harder for a developer to get their planning permit through, without a prolonged process of objections and hold-ups in the planning process, because the community benefit sharing fund is a way of distributing some of the financial benefit coming from those large-scale developments and going into community projects, whether it's fixing up the local hall, supporting a local community meals program. Like there is just such a huge range of things that these types of funds actually support, and more and more they're calling on local people to be part of a governance committee that actually decides the types of projects that they want to see funded in their community, and then oversees the application and decision process. So there's Hepburn Wind, which is a community-owned trading cooperative, also have their own Hepburn Energy Impact Fund, and they draw on their members' ideas and thoughts about how to use that impact fund. But they've got some great information on that on their website. I just want to say too, Hepburn Wind has recently changed their name to Hepburn Energy, because they now have wind turbines, solar panels, and soon they'll have battery storage as well. So they have recently changed, for anyone who didn't know that. And then the last part of this story, I guess, that I wanted to just share was the idea of being able to directly invest in a large-scale renewable energy development in your area, well, in fact, anywhere in the country. But it's a really awesome opportunity to be able to invest in a renewable energy development close by, because then when you drive past those turbines or those solar panels or what have you, you can say, I own those and they're paying dividends into my bank account, and I think that's awesome. So the Sapphire Wind Farm community co-investment model was one of the first of these in Australia. That was a large wind farm development up near Inverell and New England Highlands up in northern New South Wales and Gamilaroi country. And there are 3 wind farms that are all sort of almost joined up together there, but Sapphire was one of the bigger ones, and it's supplying, I can't remember now, I think it's close to 50% of the energy needs of the ACT. Part of the negotiations with the ACT and the development of the wind farm and Taryn Lane from Hepburn and Jarrah Hicks from the Community Power Agency were very closely involved in advising the developers of Sapphire and helping them to sort of shape up and market this community investment opportunity. And it was a raging success. They got oversubscribed from people wanting to invest in that wind farm very, very quickly, and had to shut the offer reasonably quickly. So it just goes to show that there is appetite from, everyday people wanting to invest in some of these opportunities, and particularly, if they are on the the landscape in which you live, and it is a bit of a change to the way in which you relate to your landscape, it does help if you are actually benefiting in a different way, rather than just knowing that renewable energy is going into the system. You're also able to earn some dividends from that, and it's not just going to overseas investors, which are often the ones that are investing in these large-scale developments in our country. So it's an interesting development, and hopefully we'll see more and more of these community and co-investment opportunities popping up in some of the larger developments that we're going to see lots more of in the coming years.
Moragh, we have another question if you're up for it.
Yep.
From Jonathan. There's a question. He says, I feel a bit thick asking this, but how does a renewable energy project become carbon negative? Like if it was a solar or wind project, does carbon negative mean removing carbon from the atmosphere or something different?
Yes, it's a mix of those. Was this in reference to Samso Island, Jonathan? I'm assuming, because that's where I sort of said it.
Yes, he said yes.
Part of their story is that they export more energy than they use, which is renewable or net zero accounted for. So they're sort of in credit from there. They do carbon sequestration as well. So it's in the Samso Islands situation. It's a combination of sequestration and producing more renewable energy than they're actually use on the island. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Moragh.
Yeah.
Moragh, Michael here. I have a question for you. I'm feeling absolutely overwhelmed by the volume of information that's coming here.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we're just starting a renewable energy group here in Upper Beaconsfield. Okay. And just listening to what you're saying now, I can sort of think off the top of my head about a half a dozen different projects that seem that they will fit our community quite well, but don't have the expertise to decide, which of them will slot in with the existing infrastructure and which would be most beneficial to our community. So my question is, where are we likely to get the information that we would need as a community to work out which direction we go from here? because I think the community would welcome a number of these projects, but would like to use it in the most beneficial way possible. So where do we get that expertise to help us with our little group?
It's the perfect question, Mike. Thank you for asking it. Can I get you to hold that, and then what I would like to do is we should probably take a little break because we're about halfway through the session. But what I do want to do is open it up for a discussion, and because there's a number of people here tonight that have got some level of expertise about managing parts of what you just described. So I think between us all, and I've got 15 years of experience of working on this type of thing, so I do have some ideas, but I'd like to open it up for all of us to be able to contribute a little bit to helping unpack that for you and give you some options about how you might approach that. So is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And just a very quick question.
Mm-hmm.
How many wind turbines does it take to make a wind farm?
Ah, good. That's an excellent question. Well, I would say at least 2.
Right.
Hepburn Wind is called a wind farm, and they have 2.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And they've named them. They're named Gale and Gusto. Yeah, which is awesome. So yeah, very good question. But yes, I'm going to go for 2.
So how long a break will we have, Moragh?
5 minutes around. You know, it's probably some people will be back in 5, maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah. Well, it's 2 minutes to 8 now. What about if we come back at 5 minutes past sharp?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thanks.
All right, great.
Excellent. Yep.
See you all shortly.
All right. Who's back? We're all good. Excellent. Very good. Okay. So before I move off this slide, were there any further questions or thoughts that anyone wanted to share? Nope, all good. Okay. Okay, now we're starting to get into some really considerable things. So so that is Gale and Gusto there on the left-hand side, the Hepburn wind towers, and that they were one of really the very earliest community-owned renewable energy groups that owned their own infrastructure, like, you know, considerable like this in the country. So the other one was Denmark Wind Farm over near Albany in Western Australia. Hepburn Wind made a lot of mistakes on behalf of all of us, essentially. So what they learned through having to generate the massive amount of capital for connecting to the grid and a whole lot of other, you know, regulatory issues hurdles that they had to jump over, were all breaking new ground that many other community energy groups that have come afterwards have been able to benefit from the changes and the learnings that these guys did on our behalf. So yeah, we should be incredibly thankful for these pioneers and innovators that were part of that group in the early days. So thinking about scale, so this is all in the eye of the beholder, of course. So small to mid-scale generation is loosely defined as anywhere between 200 kilowatts to 10 megawatts. So these are 2 1 megawatt towers. But you know, anything, so the installation down at the Wonthaggi State Coal Mine is that's around 150 kilowatts of solar and battery. Just starting to creep into the small scale side of things. And then what we're seeing now is that there is a bit of a sweet spot in the community energy space around the 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt size. So under a megawatt, there are sort of benefits in terms of planning permits and connection costs to the grid that make under a megawatt a good size. And then likewise, if you're going to go over, you almost want to go up to 5 megawatts, because once again, the economies of scale in terms of costs of grid connections and planning permit processes and things like that are also more cost effective, just under 5 megawatts than they are at the 10 megawatt size, for example. Almost, if you're going to go 10 megawatts, you probably want to go 50 megawatts. So it's where you are in the grid and what the connection costs are incredibly important things to consider. And there's an example in Gippsland of a community trying to get a 5 megawatt system installed, and they owned the site already, and they were advised that they could put a renewable energy system in there, and then as it turned out, after they'd done a whole lot of work on that, the grid connection costs were almost prohibitive in terms of that being a financially viable project. So they've had to work really hard to raise capital in other ways to make it actually feasible. So very, very important to think about where you might site in the grid. So Hepburn Hepburn Energy, they're putting 500 kilowatts of solar around the land next to these towers now, and they're also looking to install battery storage to complement both of those energy sources. They make that energy available through a relationship with a renewable energy company, retail company or wholesale company actually called Flow Power. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as I said earlier, they're a trading cooperative. There are also Renewable Newstead, for example, is an incorporated association, and they're doing something incredibly very different from what many other community energy groups are doing. So what they did was they worked tirelessly across their community to gauge the interest and commitment of people who lived in and around Newstead to be part of a sort of a collective approach. They didn't have any fixed or firmed ideas about what that collective approach might look like, and they developed their ideas as they went along once they understood how many people were interested. And where they've landed is that they're looking to install a 5 megawatt solar plus battery system, but they're going to be working with an installation company and owner-operators for the company and a retailer. So Renewable Newstead themselves won't have the responsibility of managing or owning that solar installation, but what they've done is they've struck a deal, a cost deal, to supply energy at a really good rate and a reduced tariff to the people that live in and around Newstead. So if the community group that you're part of doesn't want the responsibility of owning complicated infrastructure, that this model in particular might be a really, really good one. And you can go to Renewable Newstead and ask them to share the information, but it will actually, they've had so much interest in their model, they've had to actually start charging a small fee, and then they give you a really good package of information that enables you to explore how you might do this option yourselves. But it costs, I think the fee is $400. They were just getting so inundated and swamped by inquiries from across the country that they couldn't manage that level of inquiry. So they instigated this process whereby they could then justify the time that it took to give people quality information. So these are just two examples, quite different examples. Both will be
up for everyone or just me?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. So the way in which both of these groups have been raising capital has been a combination of grants, crowdsourced donations, and investment. So once again, there's a multiple of different ways of being able to raise capital, and there are now really, really good facilitators or platforms that can support you to do either crowdsourced donations or crowdsourced investment processes. So I think it's around a fixed fee of around $10,000 for a crowdsourced investment support, plus a percentage of the amount of money that you raise to a cap. So there are professional companies that are in a position to be able to support community groups, so you don't have to have this expertise yourselves. Was there a question? Sorry, I couldn't hear it properly. Was there a question from someone around this? Nope. Okay. Let's keep bombarding you with information. So I think we're close to the end in terms of community energy models and approaches, and then we will definitely get stuck into that conversation about how you might actually act on or do any of these. And we've got Helen and a couple of people from the Bunyip Renewable Energy who are in the midst of developing one of these types of projects. So I'm going to invite them to share a little bit about where they're at in their journey and what they've learned. Virtual power plants and community microgrids are like almost the ultimate in a community energy project. So just unpacking the difference, I'm going to skip ahead because I've got a couple of diagrams to help us understand what the difference between a virtual power plant and a microgrid is, and a solar garden, which is another model. So virtual power plants get around the situation where you can't legally trade energy across property boundaries. So that's where the regulations are in Victoria at the moment. We're not able to, I'm not able to sell energy to my neighbour because we're on different titles, and the regulator and the owner of the poles and wires needs to know what's going on there because they're ultimately responsible for that. So that's why the regulations are there. Having said that, the technology exists to enable us to do that sort of sharing and transference of energy, but we're not. Our regulations haven't quite caught up with the technology. So the way around that is to work with an energy retailer so it becomes an accounting process. So the virtual bit comes in because the monitoring of how the energy is generated on one site and then using an accounting system is done, using remote technology in the cloud. The retailer can monitor those transactions and account for it, and so the house generating the energy can get a credit on their energy bill, and the house using the energy is charged for that energy on their bill. So it's the energy retailer that facilitates that, along with the smart technology that they use for monitoring the energy flows. In a microgrid, you're actually physically connected. So some of the most obvious examples of this are, like I mentioned earlier, over in Western Australia, where there are small towns on their own entirely localised energy system. So towns in Western Australia are effectively on microgrids, and more and more they're being supplied by local energy generation, renewable energy generation. And so they don't have to be connected to the wider grid. Obviously, many of them still are, but I think they're because they span such a huge amount of space in Western Australia, they are very much looking to try and localise energy production and use through microgrids. So we've got a couple of microgrid examples or trials happening in Victoria at the moment and right across the country. The federal government's had a very big investment program into microgrid feasibility studies and trials around the place, and Hayfield in Gippsland is one of those places that's had a couple of $1 million invested in researching the potential of a microgrid in Hayfield town. That study's almost come to its end, and we'll have they've got a lot of useful resources already on their website. They've got reports that they produced all along the way to talk about the different stages of the project and what they learned. So it's been a 3-year journey already. But microgrids are, like I've got to say, in the current environment are very difficult, very challenging, and in most cases aren't feasible unless you're actually doing a trial. So the regulatory constraint of not being able to sell energy across tidal boundaries can be gotten over if you've got an approved trial, either working with your local poles and wires company, AusNet for us in Gippsland, or Powercore if you're over in the other part of the state, and they have to apply to the Australian Energy Market Operator for an exemption, and then they can run connected poles and wires microgrid trials. And there are several of them around. There's in Nunawading, there was one in Yakandanda, Totally Renewable Yakandanda have had a microgrid trial. And there's a couple going on farms at the moment. So yeah, they're popping up all over the place. And once again, Healesville Core are involved in one in Chum Creek.
I think also with the federal government interest in feasibility studies that you mentioned a short while ago, Monash University was very successful in getting a grant, and they've got 6 feasibility studies underway, including 2 in the Yarra Ranges region.
Yep.
And there's a question also from Mike Hall. He says, does the whole community need to be involved in a microgrid project, or can individual households opt out?
So in the virtual power plant option, anyone can opt in or out, and you know, depending on what your arrangements are with the energy retailer. But for a virtual power plant to work, you really need to all be with the one energy retailer. So that's a bit of a challenge, but is possible and does work in a lot of places. So there are 5 virtual power plant trials going on in Victoria at the moment that are run by the big power companies, but there are also smaller companies. My company is one that's trying to launch a virtual power plant trial that would be community owned and focused. With the microgrid, I don't know if I really know the answer, whether people can opt in or out.
Can I respond to that one, Moragh?
Yeah, I suspect they can't opt out if their street is connected into the grid, but maybe you've got a different idea, Jeff.
A microgrid can serve different functions. So, for example, up in Yakandanda, they set up a microgrid with a number of houses in a particular area and got all of the people who were interested in opting in to participate in that program. So some people opted in and some opted out. But once you're in, you're in. Another issue is that you can set up a microgrid in a town that is for resilience purposes. For example, in Healesville, we were looking at a microgrid that would link up things like a hospital, elderly citizens area, restaurants, a self-service, a petrol station, fire station, all these sorts of things, and a place of last resort where people could go to in the event of a disaster, so that this was an area in the town that could be fired up in the event of a disaster to provide resilience for that particular town. So it wasn't for the whole town, it was just for particular service organizations and hospital and so on and a school in the town.
So the
Jeff,
Yep.
Sorry, Jeff. Do they need to be adjacent or near adjacent in order for that to work? Like, are they actually physically connected?
In this particular instance, there was that they were going to be physically connected, yes. But I think I'm not a technical expert, but I think now with the technical systems that they have in place, they don't have to be adjacent to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So the little I do know about this through the research that you know, that's going on in some of the projects I'm involved in, I would, because if you think about the energy system is on different levels of the poles and wires, for example. So the local wires that go to our individual houses are usually very low voltage. Then you step up to 22 kilovolts, and then 66 kilovolts as the distribution wires sending energy around the system. And the transformers are the places at which you connect or disconnect from the rest of the system. So it's got everything to do with where the transformer is and whether you've got only one way in or out, like a one road in or out, or you've got energy that can come in at one end of the line and from another end of the line. So if there is only one point of disconnection, then I would say everyone on that part of the grid would have to be in. But if you've got flows from different directions, then there's probably options to be in or out, is my very crude way of thinking about this.
Yeah. We had a system in Chum Creek where we were looking at setting up a microgrid for a group of houses where there was often blackouts, and so Como Energy decided, instead of setting up a microgrid where the houses would all be connected with their own wire, with a separate wiring system, that they would actually try and set up a switch with AusNet, so that when the grid went down, the switch would come on, and then the energy production within that particular area would switch in, so they would have their own little solar farm and battery system, and the houses would all have solar panels and batteries, and that system would then run itself quite separate from the grid. And then when the grid powered up again, the switch would be switched off and they could all connect up to the major grid. So they were using the poles and wires rather than setting up their own poles and wires system, I guess.
Yeah, but it's the important idea is that where does your house and your neighbour's house, where does it connect to where do they connect to the greater grid, and where is the disconnection point? Because it's got to be, obviously you can't have multiple different energy flows in and out if you're disconnecting or connecting to the major grid. It's problematic. But I would advise, if you're going to be at the session next week when the Como Energy guys are presenting, I would strongly encourage you to ask that question of them.
That's the week after.
I'll give you a definite answer.
Not next week, the week after more.
Sorry, there you go. Okay, so just summing up on, so Solar Garden is a bit of a sort of a hybrid of microgrid virtual power plant idea. And so there's an awesome project called the Haystacks Solar Garden, and that's where you can buy a single panel or 4 panels or 5 panels in a community-owned solar farm. And then through the energy retail arrangements, you get credited for the amount of energy that's produced by the panels you own. This is a really awesome opportunity for anyone who lives in a house who can't have its own rooftop solar. So whether that's because you can't afford it, you're in a rental accommodation, you're in an apartment building, or you've got too many trees around where you live, this is a wonderful sort of emergent project. And Haystacks is out just to the north west of Wagga Wagga, in a little town called Grong Grong, and it's definitely worth looking at. And they've also had recently did a call out for investment, and I think that's also just recently closed, but they had a lot of people buying just a single panel or 5 panels, whatever they could afford. So it's an incredibly affordable way of setting up a community solar farm and giving access. And once again, it's dependent on that relationship with the retailer to make it work. So
with that, is that solar garden actually feed into the grid? Hello?
Yes, it does. Yeah, so the energy goes into the grid, so you don't have to live close by to get, it's not the actual electrons that you're buying the credit of what those electrons represent in the system.
Yeah. I think that's similar to what is happening here.
Okay.
Como is suggesting.
Awesome. So Totally Renewable Yagandanda, they're doing both virtual power plants and microgrids. So they've got a lot of learnings and really, really good reports and things that they've made available that you can have a look at. I'm involved in the Community Resilience and Reliable Energy Study down at Venus Bay at the moment, and that's looking at a combination of virtual power plant and microgrid as well. We're working with Federation University researchers that are doing the technical assessment. And that's, you know, the potential there is that there might be 3 or 4 little mini microgrids within the greater community that are in parts of the system that can flick the switch at the transformer. So if the whole grid goes down, they can flick that switch and be islanded and self-powered while the grid's down. So, you know, that might be the starting point before they eventually, you know, could go to a whole town microgrid. Hayfield is looking at a whole town microgrid, and then there's the Haystack solar garden idea. Keeping in mind that you need strong community leadership and participation. You need a research partner to be able to do the technical side of things, whether they're an academic institute or just, you know, company with technical expertise. They are expensive, these projects, both for the feasibility and design as well as the installation. They take a reasonable and long time to actually go through and do the design and raise the capital and get the community buy-in and all of those things. And then you need, you know, enduring ownership models that can be sustained over the life of the project, which you're looking at 10 to 20 years. So it's a considerable commitment, is what I'd like to point out.
There's a question from Rachel Walters, if you would like to respond. She says, is that similar to the Soul Share Allume concept?
The haystacks, the solar gardens?
I think that's what she's referring to.
Yes, as far as I know. Yeah, I don't know loads about that one. I did mean to look that one up because I know it does come up, but so sorry, I can't answer for sure, but I'm pretty, I think so, yeah. The Haystacks project is co-owned by the Community Power Agency and some other local people and community investors. So there's a strong community element to that one. Okay, so the last piece of the puzzle, and I really want to get to this discussion so that we can tease out some of the ideas and I can stop bombarding you with new information. The last part of the puzzle is having a relationship with an energy retailer. So no matter what type of project, apart from probably just the energy efficiency side of things, you don't need an energy retail partner. But for just about every other type of community energy project, where you want to connect to the grid and either export energy or share energy in some way, you will need a relationship with an energy retailer. Now, we lost our only 100% community-owned energy retailer this year because of the gas price wars, which is an absolute travesty. They like many other small renewable energy retailers, very vulnerable when the wholesale price of energy fluctuates so wildly. They've often got a high percentage of generation from solar already, so they're already vulnerable to having to buy energy when the sun's not shining or at night time. They try to diversify their mix with wind and bioenergy as much as possible, but the smaller retailers are always dependent on a larger retail or wholesale company and the energy deals that they can broker to fill the gap between what they already own or their customers are sharing, feeding into the system. So yeah, we lost Nova, which is really, really sad because they were another leading light in this space, and a lot of community people actually had invested in them as well. So that's very sad. But stepping into the space in Victoria in particular, we have Indigo Power and Co-Power, Cooperative Power Australia. They are two social enterprises and community-driven power companies, retailers, but they are backed by commercial wholesale company called Energy Locals. Both of them are backed by those companies. So they're not 100% community-owned like Nova was. And then there are other companies like Flow Power and the People's Grid, which don't have a community ownership element, but they're incredibly supportive of community energy projects. So Flow Power is connected to Hepburn Energy, they're connected to Pingala, Repower Shoalhaven. Some of the bigger community energy groups are working with Flow Power quite successfully. And then the People's Grid is a whole new kettle of fish that are just stepping into the market and are also offering some really, really neat ways to support community energy. So they're not community energy retailers themselves, but they're very enabling of community energy. So if you're looking for a retail partner, Flow Power and the People's Grid have both got skin in the game and are worth looking at. As are Indigo Power and Co-Power, they've just got less scope is what I would suggest they have in terms of the more customers that they have, the higher their risk profile becomes. So with the wholesale energy fluctuations at the moment, everyone in this business are very nervous about increasing their risk. So that's just something to be mindful of as you're hunting around for an energy retailer partner. Okay, I'm just going to skim over these just to let you know there is a whole lot of policy work that is going on all over the shop with support for community energy. So we're not just out in the wilderness trying to argue for our own worth. There are advocacy groups. They're all over the place. The Energy Consumers Association, Community Power Agency, Helen Haynes in particular is an independent member of federal parliament, is an absolute champion for community energy. And you know, the Labor, the current federal government's renewable energy policy is strongly influenced by Community Power Agency and Helen Haynes's work. So previously Cathy McGowan, and there are a few documents that you can get a hold of that give you a bit of an idea and a story about where the influences sit and where people are pushing for political support and investment from federal and state governments. And yeah, just summing up, there's some of the immediate benefits that you can expect to generate through community energy. So lower energy bills, local job creation, energy security through standalone systems that can help avoid blackouts, which Jeff just described. Returns on investments for shareholders, creation of revolving funds or community benefit funds, and you know, not to be sneezed at, this idea of community of active hope, which is where when we're all empowered to take action to address climate change, it's good for our well-being, our mental health and our physical well-being to be part of that movement, part of contributing to the transition and helping share the benefits across the community. So I think there's so many tremendous reasons to be involved in community energy. Okay, time for question and discussion, and yeah, let's get stuck into it. So who's got an idea, and maybe Helen and the Bunyip people, if you've got some insights about where you started your community energy journey, and a bit about how you got to where you are now and the project that you're doing, and that might be a one good way for Mike to help answer Mike's questions. And then let's give Mike a little bit more feedback on other ways that they might get started up there in Upper Beaky.
And there's also a comment from Neil Evenden, Moragh, saying a great presentation. Thank you, Moragh.
Thank you very much, Neil. Very good. Helen, did you want to? I don't know if we've got Helen, might be frozen. Rachel or Ray, are you from Bragg as well? Would either of you be able to? No?
I am.
Rachel, thank you.
I've sort of recently joined. I sort of joined after the roadshow. So I'm sort of still new to the community. Oh, Helen's joined back again. So
yeah.
Sorry, Helen's I keep dropping out.
Helen's our secretary. Are you back again, Helen?
Yes, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
I'll just give you a little bit of backstory and then go into the solar farm project. Bragg started about mid 2020, and with the goal of increasing the amount of renewables or decreasing the reliance on coal power in Bunyip Township. And we thought we'd start work with the Recreation Reserve, and we had this great vision of having solar panels on all the different sporting club roofs and them actually being able to feed into a battery and use their own power generated. Unfortunately, we got a few little feasibility studies and a bit of advice, and it wasn't going to be feasible. So then we came up with the thought of perhaps having a solar farm on this bit of unused land. It's actually owned by our agricultural society, and it adjoins the Recreation Reserve. And initially we thought that we could then produce power that could be
Helen, we're having difficulty hearing you. I wonder if you could switch off your video and just have the audio on, because your voice is echoing. Can you switch off your video? We can't actually hear you, Helen.
That hasn't made enough difference, unfortunately.
No.
No. No. Sorry, Helen. It's not coming through.
Helen, not hearing you. Can you switch off your audio as well, because it's interfering with the meeting?
Thanks to and
Okay. We might stop there, Helen. We'll just
can't hear me at all.
No, it's not. It's breaking up quite considerably. So
yeah.
Sorry, I'm very sorry about that. So
is that any better?
That is a bit better, yeah. Okay, I might just go to so back to Mike's question in terms of how can a young new group get themselves started. So, and like I guess I've got a couple of key ideas, having started 2 community energy groups, both of which started with some sort of community event, town hall type event, to invite as many people as wanted to come and hear about the opportunity of doing some sort of renewable energy work in your community. And those town hall events, each time they included a keynote speaker of some note. So we had Taryn Lane, for example, from Hepburn Energy. We had Matt Charles Jones from Totally Renewable Yakandanda. So people with a level of authenticity and experience that can talk about real community energy journeys are great inspirations. And through those events, you can ask for, or you can gauge what the community interest is and ask for ideas and input from people within your community. About, where does the priority lie? Like, I mean, you can do surveys. A lot of groups I know have done, like, just down at the local market or the shopping centre, being able to just go and chat to people in community to find out what's of most interest to them, because that it's an awesome way of being able to develop a level of understanding about what people in your community are looking for, as well as, then building legitimacy around the work that you do eventually choose to go and do. having said that, it's also then reliant on the people in your group and where their passions lie, where maybe their expertise lies, but where their passion lies, where you can get some traction and momentum, and bring in some of the partnerships that I mentioned earlier, particularly, some sort of technical researcher and or business case developer. You need that, both the technical and the economic analysis around a lot of projects, and that can vary in complexity as well. So, for example, the project manager at the Energy Innovation Co-op that manages the Southern Core Revolving Fund has got a level of expertise that's actually very useful and helpful for small community energy groups to be able to do a small behind the meter project in a community. And a lot of the community energy groups I know too, there's sort of this general principle that you start with something small and achievable. So it's the small wins concept. Achievable helps build expertise. You learn about all of the aspects of project management and the renewable energy space as you go. It's often more affordable to do a small project, and everything that you learn will be valuable for doing more of the same or bigger projects. So I guess they're sort of the two key ideas I'd like to share, is somehow gauging what the interest is in your community and where the priorities might lie, so that you can try and respond to those, because that's definitely going to be a good way to connect with your community and maybe bring more people in to help. And the second one is to try and identify sort of a high value, low cost project that you could do relatively easily to build your knowledge and skills and partnerships around. So they seem to be the sort of the key starting points for a lot of groups. But has anyone else got any other things to share, or Mike, do you want to reflect on any of that?
I appreciate all your advice there. I think the idea of starting small and trying to get some wins on the board, whilst at the same time beginning to research into future projects, seems very logical and not quite so scary.
Yeah.
Our desire locally from the small group that we've got would be to try and set up something like a microgrid with its own battery as a part of community resilience. We're in a bushfire area,
Yeah.
and the risk for us is that we lose power when that happens, and so we would like to have that as a resilience project, but to be able to sell that to the community as a way that we can actually do that and save money. That would be the sell, but I think we just don't have the expertise at this stage to even begin to start that off. But one other
project as you could probably go for, apart from maybe a 40 megawatt solar farm. But
yeah.
I don't know if you've ever have you come across the Knowledge Hub on the Australian Renewable Energy Agency's website. So that's ARENA, the organisation that the previous federal government tried to get rid of,
Yeah.
and weren't successful because they are resilient. They've got the most amazing archive of research projects around different renewable energy and microgrids and community energy type projects. So if you're up for reading reports, that's a great place to go to. But so are the websites of all of those community energy groups I highlighted in tonight's presentation. That every one of them have got a report about, at least one report or multiple reports about the work that they've done. So yeah, once again, I would really strongly encourage you to just read as widely as you possibly can, and bit by bit you'll start to piece together the type of thing that might fit your community.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you very
I would support what you're saying there, Moragh, to start small, the low-hanging fruit, and working within the restrictions and limitations of the skill set of your particular community. And we found with Healesville Core that it takes time to build up the momentum and the expertise, the experience, and you can't really do much in terms of things like microgrids and even smaller medium-sized projects without some support from electrical engineers, people with expertise in electrical engineering and business. And that's one of the reasons why when the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub was set up, we did that in conjunction with an industry resource, an industry support with Como Energy. They had the technical information to be able to provide that to us. But that came after 5 years of development in Healesville Core, and we could never have done that sort of thing right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I? Oh, have I? Yeah. Sorry. Something in the back of my mind that just keeps on ticking over. And I hope not to spend too much time and let other people have a go. But I've been a long-term volunteer with the CFA, and I've noticed as I'm driving around that there are rooftops all around the state that are just begging to have solar panels on them. And the likelihood or the possibility for a group such as the CFA to hook into or be actually a power generator for the state, and at the same time helping to mitigate climate change, which is in their own best interest. What are your thoughts on that as an initiative?
I think it's an awesome one. I'm also in our local CFA, and I would think that that's an absolute winner. Not least of all because you would ideally go for a standalone, like an islandable system, which has got solar and batteries. So if the grid did go down, the fire station could still be powered, which, as you would know, in an emergency, that's critically important. Because so much of our things rely on, all our utilities and devices rely on energy. I think that's an awesome one. The Venus Bay feasibility study is looking at exactly doing that, powering the Tarwin Lower and the Venus Bay CFA stations. So, yeah, if you had thoughts on a statewide program, I'd love to hear more about that and see if I could support that in some way.
I was hoping you'd have that thought because you've got the expertise. But I'm wondering, if you did start a project such as that, what its payback time would be, because I would think it would necessarily be in the CFA's best interest. I would think a payback time for the solar panels themselves would be around about 3 or 4 years now, and maybe the batteries would be at 8 or 9 years. But
solar and batteries combined are sitting at around 5 or 6 years now, so it's not so bad.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll have to have a chat with the local. There's no incentive for a local brigade to do it, though, because from our point of view, and I'm sure it's the same with your brigade, the CFA Central pays for that. So our local brigade's not interested in putting our money into a project because we get nothing back for it. So I think it needs to be centrally driven.
I think there might be a bit of external advocacy, though. I think about the analogy of schools. So, for a long time, so the state government also pays the energy bills of public schools, and the state government's been resisting for years funding solar on schools. Some individual schools went ahead and did it, but there was no advantage because the money they saved, they just didn't get in their allocation from the state government. So the savings went into consolidated revenue.
Yes.
But the lobby group for solar schools has been incredibly successful, and now the state government's committed to funding solar on all our schools. So, and somehow sharing the benefits of that. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but we've got a contribution there from Rachel saying that Malakuta CFA. Do you want to just give us a heads up on that, Rachel?
I think I watched the Malakuta show on the ABC, like it was a couple of months ago, and I seem to remember that the CFA, because they're all on a microgrid now as part of their community, like the whole town's basically off grid. And I'm pretty sure, from memory, I could be misremembering, but I think that the CFA was included in that as part of the community when they organised that, and maybe they've done something, so they might be somebody to look to potentially as somebody who's already done it for a resource, if CFA can tap into that.
Yeah, the Malakuta microgrid is not doesn't power everything. They are powering some critical infrastructure in the main part of town. but they're, obviously that's a work in progress. So they've got a small amount of local solar and battery now, but it doesn't power the whole town yet. But that is definitely where they're headed, for obvious reasons in Malakuta's case. Yeah.
And Moragh, there's a question or a statement from Jonathan from Warburton again. He's saying, very good question and answers. Wouldn't be fantastic to see that get off the ground? I presume he means the CFA concept. It's the money side of thing that gets in the way. And I think also the organizational side of things, like we tried to set up panels on the local CFA and SES, and they have to go to their local regional office, and there's a whole lot of bureaucracy involved, and they then get dissuaded from actually doing the work because it takes so long once it goes into the system for the bureaucracy to deal with things, and that's a real pity. But that's Jonathan's contribution.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I can feel the momentum building around that idea. I think we'll all have to start pinging off the points of connection we have with the CFA and start putting the pressure on. I think they, I know CFA has become very bureaucratic, unfortunately, but certainly there would be a lot of money to save. I would imagine, apart from the emissions footprint that we could reduce of the CFA by doing renewable energy on stations, as well as the resilience and safety factor of when they need to have electricity in emergency situations. Any other comments or questions? Feedback?
Well, for fear of dominating the night, can I just tell a story? Just a very quick story that at my last CFA meeting that I was at, one of our members is a geothermal engineer, and I was just sitting next to him and saying, how's things? And he said, flat out. And I said, so what's the story? Is it something to do with the change of governments at the last election? And he said, absolutely. A lot of the companies now can see where the government is heading, what they need to be doing, and they're all now looking for these alternatives to energy sources for their businesses. And geothermal engineering has been a high point for, I'm guessing mainly for heating purposes, but he's absolutely flat out. He's got no time to come to the brigade anymore.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, that's exciting for him and disappointing for the brigade, but because we can't afford to lose members, can we?
No.
Yeah, look, I can speak from direct experience. When I was at the Latrobe Valley Authority, we actually funded a lot of the mapping work of the geothermal resource across Gippsland, and yeah, it's now part of very, very wide thinking of the local councils and other businesses across Gippsland about making use of the shallow geothermal, the stuff that's only a couple of 100 metres under the surface of the land, is runs at about 30 to 50 degrees, and that's really good for heat source, so heating swimming pools, but also heating houses and space heating.
Yeah.
But then there's stuff that's a couple of kilometres down that is hot enough to drive significant electricity producing turbines, so that's very exciting. There's a bit of work to be done, but there's a couple of really good technology advancements in Queensland that are sort of leading the way on that geothermal electricity production, and hopefully we'll see more of that come to, there's a trial proposed for Gippsland, so that'll be great to see.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and I always presumed it was for big businesses and tower blocks and things like that. But he said that it's even economical now at the household level, which is really interesting.
Yeah, very cool to see. Yeah.
We have a comment from Helen Ross. She says, I have to give up here. My connection is dropping out all the time. Thanks, Moragh. Great presentation. And Jonathan responding, Helen, it would be good to hear you finish your story at a later time, hopefully.
It would be really good. So yeah, that's going to be an awesome project. It's getting the support from Como Energy and doing the research and the business case development. So there's a lot of great knowledge that group's developing, that other groups will be hopefully be able to pick up and adapt to their own circumstances.
And Rachel from Bragg has also given a link to the Bragg website for people who might be interested in checking that out.
Cool. Jonathan, have you got any connection with the micro hydro there in Warburton?
No, I do know Julian Guess, who was very involved with it. I was actually wondering about this. Not really enough time, being a minute left. But I only just thought of like all the creeks that there are around the area, and what how you would find out the legal information about putting like a micro hydro sort of thing in place. I live next to one, coincidentally, but there's Melbourne Water, and there's the environmental side of things you have to be careful of. And
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot involved. I know very little about the ins and outs of micro hydro, but yeah, maybe someone from the Warburton group that has been managing that project. So Warburton is one of a couple of towns around the state that have been reinvigorating the beautiful old hydro systems that were there, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Now down in East Gippsland is another one, and there's a few around, I think. But maybe, Jeff, it'd be wonderful to have someone speak on that particular project, because they've also, they had to raise capital and do a bit of a drive to try and raise the funds. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, we were working with them through the hub in the background to support their ongoing viability and development. But I just, in relation to other creeks, to respond to Jonathan, I understand that Melbourne Water has been importing micro hydro systems from New Zealand, which consist of a big container that can be put beside a water source, where you can feed the flow of energy in one end, and you get a little turbine moving in the container, and the water comes out the other end and goes back into the creek. And I think they've put a number of these around on a trial basis, but I don't know anything about the outcome of it. But like you, I'm a great believer in that. And when we got Healesville Core underway, we've got the Maroondah Dam in our area, and we've got someone to put using the technology to put an image of a floating solar farm on the Maroondah Dam. It looks very interesting, but I'm not sure that Melbourne Water would be interested in taking it up. But these sorts of things, like Japan has a lot of floating solar panels on dams and various lakes and so on, and they're a very real possibility. So I'm right with you on that, Jonathan. But I think we need to come to a close, Moragh. We're just after 9 o'clock. I'd like to thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Very informative, very interesting. And it seems like others in the group found that as well. We still have 13 people involved, which is fantastic. And very many people saying thank you.
There's the comment from Emerald Community House saying that they got another grant today.
Yeah,
so
56,000 K.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
For more panels and batteries. So that's brilliant. Congratulations.
Yeah, fantastic. Really very good. And just looking forward to our next presentation. We've got Lucinda Flynn from who's going to be giving a presentation on home energy efficiency. Lucinda is very well qualified to do that work. She has been involved in providing services to homes with the energy scorecard scheme over a period of time now. And she set up for us, or for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, a course through Box Hill Institute to train volunteers in home energy efficiency. And we trained over 20 people from various community energy groups around our outer eastern region. So I invite you all to come along to that session. I think you'll find it very interesting. In addition to that, there's a whole lot of resources that she's made available, and a little bit of self-directed study to do as well. And I will get Mary and Miriam from Emerald and from Pakenham to circulate that information to you tomorrow so that you've got that well in advance of the session next week. Moragh is going to be presenting this session again for Pakenham on Saturday morning. So if you know any other people who might be interested, please point them in the direction of the Pakenham website for getting involved. And
I've popped my email address in the chat too, if anyone wants to follow up on anything that I had in the presentation tonight, or if there's just a lead or a connection that you might be wanting my help to make. I'm very, very happy to help or contribute where I can.
I see that. moragh.mackay@mycelia.org.au.
That's me.
Yeah, okay. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this will be made available as a video, which you can then pass on, the link you can pass on to other people, and you can have a look at the session again to catch up on Moragh's slides, which will be embedded in the video. That's something good to look forward to. So thank you again, Moragh. Thank you everybody for attending, and look forward to seeing you all next week at the session with Lucinda Flynn. Bye for now.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful. Bye-bye. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.